The judge was ruthless, now gaming will change.
More than almost anything we talk about on the channel, today's story is actually going to tangibly impact you. So, for 5 years, there's been a battle waging at the highest levels of the games industry. It's massive, it's between Apple, it's between Epic, and it's around the principle of fairness. And the big news today is that
To be absolutely fair, it wasn't about the principle of fairness. It was about the fact that Epic did not want to pay one-fourth of their profits to Apple if something happened on Apple's store. That's what it was all about. It was about money.
Apple just lost. But they didn't lose because Epic Games outmaneuvered them or any kind of insane gigabrain play from Tim Sweeney. No, they lost because, in the words of the judge presiding over this decision, Apple leadership, quote, outright lied under oath, and in deciding not to comply with legal injunctions, Tim Cook, quote, chose poorly. It's an ominous
Ooh.
thing for a judge to be saying to you.
That is a hilarious thing for a judge to say to you. That means it's over. You have no shot, okay? It was decided by the stars above.
This, though, is a dramatic case. It has impacts that will reverberate across the entire games industry, and honestly, far wider than that, meaning it truly will impact everyone who watches this video. Here's how all this started. So, Tim Sweeney is a man on a mission, and it's a mission that's cost him and his company more than $1 billion over the last 5 years. It's fair to say that he's pretty committed. Now, 5 years ago is when he decided that Apple and Google's exclusive storefronts on their mobile platforms were in fact unreasonable monopolies. In his opinion, essentially.
And I agreed with that, by the way, because they obviously are.
He says that they don't.
If you want to, by the way, sell a mobile game, if you're trying to sell it without Apple Store, good luck. You just completely ended yourself.
Earn their 30% fee. Rather, they impose it, and that because of that, they're restricting how developers could make money and what sort of deals that they could actually offer to consumers. So what he decided to do was force their hand. So he started something called Project Liberty, and here's how it worked. Fortnite.
Bro, it was so cringe, this video that they did about this. Oh, we're fighting for the little guys, but actually it's about just the 30%. It's always about money.
Here's how it worked. Fortnite suddenly got an option where users could buy currency directly from Epic, right? Directly, not through your Apple payment or Google payment thing. That, of course, meant that Apple and Google immediately booted Fortnite because it did break their store policies. And this is exactly what Tim Sweeney actually wanted. He wanted his game to be kicked off. And we pretty much know that because Epic immediately filed lawsuits that they had been.
Yeah, we know this. This was bait. This was literal bait.
Preparing, and these were designed to force the stores to change those policies. Now, in the case of Google, it actually went so much better than any of us could have expected. Evidence actually emerged that certain developers like Activision had been paid not to rock the boat, and that they deleted documents and were broadly proven to have acted unfairly. They lost on all counts as determined by a jury. The platform was opened up to new stores, and Google have appealed. It was a complete win for Epic, but their fight against
Google appealed. Does that actually mean anything? Also, I'm not sure where this lawsuit actually took place. I'm assuming America because it's Epic and Microsoft, so...
Apple is an entirely different story. Things that began to look quite bad for Epic. You see, the outcome of that initial trial, the original one, was an almost complete defeat for Epic Games. They basically could not prove being the emphasis word there, that any kind of monopoly or unfair action was going on. But there was one exception. An injunction was placed against Apple, and this was to end anti-steering provisions. You might think, what is anti-steering? Well, it's actually pretty simple. So basically, it meant that Apple could no longer prevent developers from directing users to make purchases outside of the store. So basically, steering you the...
Oh my! You know what this means? Because I don't think there is a way to actually counter it. Because this means that everyone can do what Epic did at the start here. Hey, buy with Apple right here. Buy with Apple, pay $10 like a sucker. Or you can buy through our store and pay just 8 and get a bonus. How about that, sweet cheeks? And, well, who the hell is gonna choose to lose even two... Even if you're a millionaire, you're choosing the $8 here, as long as it doesn't require 100 clicks to go through, okay? And it's so easy.
the store. So basically steering you, the customer, somewhere else. So as an example, that would be buying V-Bucks in Fortnite through a web client rather than through Apple's purchasing system, which would thus avoid Apple's 30% cut. Now, at the time, the judge said that Apple should be entitled to something, but that they can't force people to use their in-app purchase systems. Apple then spent 3 years appealing, and it's Apple, they can afford lawyers, but they really got nowhere on that front. And this is when that same judge came back and filed a
Apple, as every single large company, has. Listen, it doesn't matter if you what kind of company you are. You can make microchips. You can make games. You can make whatever. But always, 100% of time in every single giant company, there's gonna be the number one department and the number two department. The number two department is gonna be lawyers. They're on permanent payroll, and there's a lot of them, so they can deal with anything that comes their way. And the most important part that no one actually remembers, even though it's quite the obvious one, it is. Why does this word constantly keep slipping me? Bookies? What's the name? Not finance. Uh, accounting. Accounting. Every company that is big, that is actually worth millions or billions, has an absolutely massive accounting department because that department saves them the most money per year because they need to do a lot of shenanigans to steal.
a new injunction against Apple for their behavior in the last 3 years.
And when I say steal, I mean legalized stealing because all the good stealing is legalized nowadays.
And this one truly is remarkable, and depending on how things shake out, there could even be a criminal component. It's quite wild. So, it wasn't just for a lack of compliance with the original order, but for contempt of court, which is usually frowned upon. So much so that they've been referred to the US Attorney's Office to consider criminal contempt proceedings. That would be dramatic. Now, the judge essentially was not pleased that Apple implemented new costly fees around off-app purchases, where basically they were effectively replacing one anti-competitive process with another, meaning of course, devs lose, but also us customers lose. And while they were doing all that, they were also misleading the court over what they were doing. Here's a quote. That it thought this court would tolerate such insubordination was a gross miscalculation. As always, the cover-up made it worse. For this court, there is no second bite of the apple. Yeah, GG,
Wow.
Judge. Quite the zinger. So she laid out then some clear rules. These are practices that Apple are banned from. Number 1, imposing a fee in purchases made outside an app. That means that they have no reason, therefore, to track those purchases, the ones made outside an app. Ban number 2, setting conditions on how devs can direct users outside of an app, including restricting how links work. Basically, those design anti-patterns that are just trying to get you, the consumer, to clearly do something by, making a link look weird or a misleading design, that sort of thing. A third, banning certain types of app from directing users to outside purchases. And finally, using, quote, emotive language to persuade consumers to remain in the in-store purchase system. Basically, scaring people who don't know better. And, well, we've actually seen Apple do similar things, saying you can go and make a purchase, not using the App Store, but, the App Store is very secure and very safe, which, to an average person who's not...
Oh yeah, that's I forgot about this one. It's like, are you sure you don't want to use our system? The other system is filled with hackers and shit, so think twice, buddy. You wouldn't want to lose your life, huh? You wouldn't want to accidentally donate your kidneys to Al-Qaeda. That's right. That stuff went hard at some point.
Not tech savvy could basically look like it's Apple saying, hey, you could get scammed if you don't click this link. P.S. This link gets us lots of money too. And of course, the reason why these things are banned is, well, because Apple had been doing all of these things. That's what's led to this whole case. Now, in response, they have now begun complying and appealing. It'll be interesting to see how malicious their compliance is. I imagine it will be as malicious as is humanly possible without getting in even more trouble. But all of it...
I imagine it would not be, so they have a bigger chance of actually going through with the appeal.
This is happening while the rest of the industry is licking its lips. Some developers already had updates to go in this. Spotify were a major one. They framed this as a huge consumer win, which in fairness I would say it absolutely is. Now we can do insane things like manage our subscriptions in an app. We can use different payment options and we can see costs. You can now buy Kindle books in the Kindle app. Patreon memberships are no longer marked up on iOS to counteract the store tax, and lots of things. But of course, let's bring it back to Tim Sweeney and Epic Games. So, the Epic Games Store mobile version already existed as of last year, but now they are really ramping things up. Within a week of the ruling, Epic announced their web store fee would drop to 0% for your first million in revenue, with that starting this June. That's obviously pretty awesome if you're a dev. Plus, much like they have done with the Epic Online Services stuff, what they've done with the store is they've built a solution that people can use regardless of platform. So, be it Google, be it Apple, anything. But more than that, it doesn't need to be the literal Epic Games Store. That's because web shops can basically run on their infrastructure, and that will let any developer go outside Apple's payment system with no fuss. Yes, Tim Sweeney's definitely taken this one personal, and you know what? I'm here for the drama. Anyway, it is great for devs, but players are also being incentivized here, where you're going to get 5% reward points through purchases on those shops and the Epic Games Store, but that's boosted to 20% until the end of August. So that essentially is the big clap back against Apple. But there is the other thing, the Fortnite. So Tim Sweeney has
By the way, all of this is technically good because the easiest way to entice someone to use your shop is, well, to give as many discounts, as many bonuses as you can obviously humanly add. And, well, in this case, it's like, they're just gonna fight who gives you the better deal, which is kind of super awesome, honestly. Because most fights are gonna go that way. Because if both parties are bad, you pick the least bad one. But if both parties are bad and suddenly there's a third party that says, yeah, we're not assholes. Congratulations, third party. You just won my heart over. I applaud you. Very cool. And there you go. Now everyone has to fight who gives the player the best deal, not the shittiest deal. I think that matters a lot.
proposed that Fortnite can return to app stores within weeks, like super quick, provided Apple allows them to do so. He also said he'll drop all litigation as part of a peace plan, provided Apple roll out this policy worldwide. And instead, as of the time of writing and recording this video, Apple have, went and blocked the Fortnite submission. Now, of course, all of this legal maneuvering so far is only in the US. The current policy implementation on Apple's side only applies in that region right now. Fortunately, though, for those of us benefiting from EU rules, we've already had some things for months already, and Apple can't stop it. An absolute
Why is one of my hands so much better than this one? Said too soon, but you get the point.
bomb was dropped in the industry in March of this year when both Google and Apple were found to be in breach of the Digital Markets Act by the EU Commission. And this is pretty damn big stuff. They can absolutely sting these companies. So with Google, it was for anti-steering.
By the way, if you're actually wondering why does the EU fine companies for literally hundreds of millions, while America's like, well, you made 100 million stealing from from the people. We're gonna now fine you for $3. If you ever wonder why actually that is the case, it's pretty simple. If the EU has to take justice in its own hands against the company that's from the EU, they're also gonna charge like $5 for multi-millions of hundreds of millions of damages to the consumer. But if it's from another country that's outside of the EU, like, what does the EU care about the livelihood of that thing? Every country cares about its big companies, and they don't want to see them burn. They can't actually see them burn. This is why America never punishes their own companies for being horrible people and destroying the lives of people. They will always punish like 100 million gain through illicit means is going to be punished with like a unironic 5 million fine. That's how it's gonna work. And that happens always because you don't want your own companies to get destroyed. You want them to thrive.
practices, and Apple was for blocking third parties from interfacing with their systems. Now, this follows last August's, yep, told you we'd come back to that, ruling that Apple had to open their platform up to alternative stores, and another breach from Apple in April of this year, also on steering. Now, in that last case, they also faced a cool little €500 million fine for what was absolutely flagrant breaches of the law. Apple are obviously appealing because that's what you do when you're a company, but there's a clear trend. The tide is
Appealing doesn't mean anything. It could be a win, it could be a loss, it could be nothing.
absolutely shifting. Now, it's not going to happen in all regions, but we are seeing regulation over major platforms to protect consumer interests from companies who otherwise would control them. So, between that and, I guess, a billionaire slap fight led by Tim Sweeney, well, look, we should take these wins when we can get them. Not to bring up an old drama, and it is a bit of a different story, but I suppose a little bit like how Hulk Hogan versus Gawker was, in fact, Peter Thiel versus Gawker. This is all kind of billionaire slap fights. Now, the thing with Tim Sweeney, right? He does have good principles. There are good principles that he talks about, right?
Accidentally, though. 100%, at least that's my opinion.
And yes, it's good he's trying to hold Apple to those, but that does not make Tim Sweeney automatically on your side. Sometimes it just so happens that we're aiming at the same target. Now, he will end up benefiting from this massively and in a financial way. And of course, that's because his company is the one building the wraparound solutions that power these out of app purchases. And that's really big. And that means that we can appreciate the consumer good that this does. We absolutely can. And the work that the regulators are doing to break down these walled gardens. And in an ideal world, right, once the walled garden is so big and so ubiquitous, you might have to, restrict the freedom of Apple to go and run a monopoly, because not only will it be good for consumers, it will also be good for competition. But I also do think, Standard Oil gets broken up. Who's left with the money to gobble up all the assets? Oh, pretty much the same people. So there's all.
He's referring to Standard Oil being one of the biggest, I think it's actually the biggest monopoly of all time. And then Standard Oil got broken up into smaller things like Shell, and I actually don't remember, but it was a bunch of things. It was like 20 different things. And guess what? Those 20 smaller different things still in a lot of situations acted as one company and did things as one company. So the breaking up wasn't it worked at the end, but it didn't work instantaneously. Also, I would argue that we are no longer in a time where you can't break up a company. Breaking up Microsoft is impossible. Also, it's never happening considering, you know, uh, Trump really wants AI and Microsoft has a quantum computer.
Always that thing then where you can have these good pro-consumer regulations, but it's the incumbents with the resources who are immediately able to get around them or exploit the new opportunity, and Epic Games basically, doing its store as a backend to do payment providing for everybody else. Well, while it is good because it means there is more competition, it also
The ultimate end game of any business is figuring a way to become a payment provider. Being a payment provider is just free money, boys. And a lot of hackers. You actually never hear about payment providers being hacked, but they're pretty much being hacked every day, and then someone tries to, scam them or whatnot. It's kind of funny. Anyway, that was a Billionaire News. 10 out of 10. Bye!